Okay. So, um, so describe your search for a home, and Mark has got Villawood with a question mark. Was there a time when you were looking in, or when the family was looking for Villawood as a home, or considering that as a place, and like how was it that you ended up in Narwee?
Yes, that's a good question. Because when Dick got out of the Air Force, um, we started looking for, because keep in mind that while Dick is an Englishman, like born in England, he they migrated too, and they like the seaboard. They like our eastern seaboard. Living at Coogee, of course, and being a surfer and a great swimmer. He was one of the best swimmers in the Air Force. He used to swim, and for them, when there's competitions on, and so we went looking for a block of land. We thought, we were so immature, and there was a block of land at Tamarama on the cliff. It was one of those. It was glorious. You were really in an elevated position, but it was something like £2,000, and this block, and I because both Bondi and Coogee are well built out, as it was one of the few. We used to look around the estate agents, and apart from anything else, we didn't have 2,000. We didn't have $2 really pounds they were, to rub together, and so we thought, well, what will we do? We already had Richard and Robert. We had both of them at Bondi, and then I don't know how we got onto. We must have been looking at estate agents and getting clues about like other areas, and then we drew this house. We drew this house in the. It was like a lottery, and all of a sudden there was a house. No, sorry. We drew a housing commission house at Villawood, and so I was just recuperating from rheumatic fever. What did I have? Rheumatic fever, and I was barely on my feet, and we didn't have a car, and so Dick had a friend who had a truck or something, and so we came to Villawood and looked at this housing commission house. Well, it was a fibro house, and it was two bedrooms, two-bedroom fibro house, and when you went up the front couple of steps, there was a bit of woodwork there, and it had knotted wood. It looked as if it had been thrown together with the scraps. This piece of woodwork looked weird, and the house looked. Look, I was less than impressed, Ben. It was pretty awful, and then Dick was working back at Ajax Electrical Company, and he was at that stage. He was on call for emergencies night and day. His boss used to send him on electrical work that was vital, and he could be called at any hour of the night, and Dick didn't have a car, so it would have meant trying to. What would he? It just wasn't on to be at Villawood. Villawood didn't have a rail. You couldn't get there by rail, and the transport to Villawood was no good. And so on all sides, It was an awful house, and in an awful place for him to get to on call. And so we came back to the Housing Commission and said, look, we couldn't that simply won't work out. We couldn't do that for the work that Dick's doing. We didn't say that we didn't like the house. We kept that to ourselves, but it was pretty awful. And so they were pretty snooty about it, and they said, well, you'll go to the bottom of the list, you know that, don't you? And Dick said, look, I don't care. He said, I don't care. I've got to have somewhere that's more accessible. And because Ajax was in town, it was in Pitt Street. That Dick used to pass the AMP, usually at the time I was coming out. I think he had it rigged. He'd be going on the job. He'd have his young apprentice with him in his bag of tools and looking as scruffy as can be, and as all of us were tippling out of the building. And so they were stationed in, that was his headquarters in town. And of course, living at Bondi, it just wasn't on. So anyway, but within about a fortnight, we were offered this place. Now, this wasn't finished. This street, they'd started all of these houses all around here in Arilla Avenue and Baralga. They had started them, but they were all just at different stages of, from the ground up. Some were this high and some were that high, and they're far from finished. This Kit's next door, the one where the Chinese now are, rebuilt, of course, and these were the first two cottages finished, and they hadn't even, the road wasn't even made. Trucks used to come along this back fence, supplying building materials to build the houses, and they had to, and it wasn't sewered. There wasn't. There was no gas, no gas pipes laid. It was just virgin land that had belonged to a poultry farmer. All this was a big area and the government had sort of almost requisitioned it. They had said, we want that land to build all the ex-servicemen are needing housing, and we've got to have this land. And so the poor thing, for 3 years, we were here 3 years, and the poultry farmer was still fighting the government for a better price, and they gave him something like £40 a block, some ridiculous insult for this land when you see what it's worth now. And he kept on knocking it back, and they went to court about it. It was awful. So for 3 years, once we had settled in here, we weren't given the chance to buy it because it hadn't been sold they hadn't fixed up the poultry farmer, and so we had paid for 3 years. We paid £2 a week. Now remember, Dick came out of the Air Force to Civvy Street, and his pay packet was £6 a week. So £2 a week went off straight away. A rent. You paid, the rent man used to come round. You paid your £2 every week, and that went on for 3 years, and then it was finally sold. And so then we thought, we want to buy it. It would be good. It's a brand new house. We'll buy it, but we needed finance. We needed someone to take the mortgage. War service homes came to our assistance, and they offered us anybody that had been in the forces. They would take a mortgage for 45 years, up to 45 years to pay it off, and it was very reasonable, and it was in our bracket, like we had £4, and that I had the two little boys, and you know, and just getting to play. Well, we had to walk. Used to walk to Naui to get your vegetables and stuff like that. And I forget how we used to work it all, but we decided that we had. If you took the long term, if you took 45 years, it would. I forget how many years it would take to pay it off. But we reckoned that we had been paying £2 a week. The weekly payments were something like £1 3 shillings or something for the long term, and we decided that we would pay. We'd take the mortgage on, but we would pay £2. We'd go on paying our £2 a week. And that built up into a fund, you know. It was growing and growing and growing. So by the time we were about in our early 40s, we'd bought the house. It was paid off. Just keeping that same, and of course, in '66 we went digital. We went, you know, into the different sort of currency, but we'd paid it off by then anyway. Oh golly, let me just think. Anyway, we've had it a long time. I know when we got our first rates notice, it was £42. It was £42, I think, rates, council rates. And by this time, of course, we'd got the gas on, and what else? Oh, there's everything. Your rates cover garbage, and they cover everything, don't they? Mm-hmm. But it was amazing to me. Like most people, the majority of people were ex-servicemen. Peter next door was Army, and the fellow that side was Army. And this side, now our neighbour this side was they had to leave a few cottages for people with should be here because of medical reasons. And the family that moved in next door had been living at Cronulla, and they had an asthmatic boy, and the doctors had said he's too close to water, he's allergic to whatever the living conditions are out there. He needs a drier climate or something, and the government had made provision for people that had special needs, just a few dotted around, so that you found that the next door again was the Musgraves, and he'd been in the Air Force, and the next fellow been in the Army, and the next one had been in the Navy, and so it went on, you know. Most people had been in forces of some sort, of some description, just a few odd ones, and likewise Arilla Avenue. And so we've seen this, and then of course it was really funny, the little path up the yard, that's where when we're on the pan, you know, no sewerage, and on Mondays, the dunny man would come with our clean pan, you know, and before this road was all churned up, and nobody could drive anything. You couldn't drive a vehicle into it, and so he was down in Carn Street, and he'd have to come up with his empty can, and do each house carrying it from Carn Street, the full one, to go. Oh, did ever I feel sorry for a person? What a job! And so it seemed so primitive, but golly, never mind primitive. We're in the heart of everything. We feel we're in the middle of everything these days. We're not isolated, but so you can get used to living anywhere, Ben, if you have to.
Yeah,
it wouldn't have been my choice, and in a sense, I'm glad I'm not out. When we go to Bondi, everything seems so cramped.
Yes.
And you know, even many times we've driven past 32 Watson Street, and the houses look so little and so So, cheek by jowl, you know. So, by God's grace, we were given this place, and it's been good. It's been, for all its common brick, there's nothing flash about it. It has stood up to all sorts of gales. When we first moved up here, of course, we used to have frosts, terrible frosts. We had a bird bath in the middle of the front lawn. It had a sheet of ice over it.
Wow.
You know, and we did feel the cold. And Dick bought electric blankets, and I've still got my original bed blanket.
Wow.
I've still got it.
Wow.
And boy, do I put it on of a night just to warm the bed. Once it's warm, I jump into it. I don't leave it on.
Yep.
But it's been good. It's been really good, Ben. Honestly.
Yep.
And I can only say God's good. He's been so good to us.
I've got many memories coming here as a child as well, and you know, spending Christmases here, and we'd come out here into this back room, and
with the long tables.
Yes, that's right, the long tables, and then there'd be, you know, Marcus would have his Atari, and of course that was in the new sort of gaming technology at the time, and
Absolutely.
I was, you know, as you probably remember, we always used to come out here and play the Atari together.
Exactly,
and
lovely.
go for walks up to the park there. Me, Luke, and Beck. Often the three of us would
Isn't that lovely?
walk around out the back here, do a full lap of the park, and then out.
That's right,
The park
into Bonds
over
Road
there
or whatever.
Yeah,
Incredible.
lots of fun memories of this in this house.
Isn't that lovely, Ben? But I can remember your grandmother too. One very hot Christmas, and she sat out on the patio out there to cool off. You couldn't get cool anywhere. It was one of those really stinking days. And also what we used to do, we always used to look around for somebody at church that didn't have anywhere to go on Christmas Day and invite them, like your mother does. Your mother still does that sort of thing. Oh, sorry, Ben.
That's all right.
And we asked this lady, what was her name? Oh, I'll remember it in a minute. And she palled up with your grandmother, and they sat out there and had a lovely time. They thoroughly enjoyed, for all it was hot, they enjoyed the Christmas Day.
Yep.
And yes, her name was Mary. Well, the whole name will come to me. Anyway, that was Christmas Day. And I remember Dahlia being, you know, quite. Mary was an English woman, and because your grandmother spoke very good English, you could tell that she was Italian, or she did have another second language, and but they hit it off. They seemed to have a ball. They really thoroughly enjoyed themselves. It was really heartwarming, and but that was. But then, early in the new year, Mary was the one that jumped under the train at Riverwood.
Right.
And I've always thought it was within weeks, perhaps a week and a half, of being here for Christmas Day. It was early in the new year. And I thought, isn't that sad? I wonder what drove her to that. I know she was living on her own down near the fire station at Riverwood. And you just never know with people, do you, Ben?
That's right.
If you could look ahead and see that, you'd have tried to stave that off. And she seemed to fit in with St Andrews. She used to come, and who knows? I don't.
It's always a bit of a shock to the system, isn't it? Friend of mine not so long ago committed suicide. Guy that I was in primary school, like quite good friends with in primary school. Actually, you would probably know Nicholas Brennan. The Brennans, their parents are friends with my parents as well. So it was John and Rose Brennan, and they had 3 children. The oldest of which was my age, and we were good friends in primary school.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, anyway, just last year, Nicholas Brennan, like he'd been suffering over the years depression and bipolar disorder and
really?
a number of other
That's a wretched
psychological.
thing.
Yeah, and he took his own life. Left behind wife and 3 small children.
Oh, how awful.
Yeah. So that was. You just don't expect it, do you?
You don't. And that's why it's such a shock. And you think, if only I could turn around the clock, perhaps I could have been some help. I think there's something in us always wishes that we had perhaps taken more notice of that person or tried to understand. But if they don't open up and it's not obvious, you're not aware of it so often, are you, Ben?
True.
But, dear Mary,
Ooh.
it's so sad. Yeah.
So, tell us a bit more about your brother Harry. So, what was he like as a child and then later as an adult?
Harry was he was an outgoing sort of a fellow. He joined the Scouts early in his life, but he lived his own life very much. Even as a child, he would have. Our backyard was always full of boys in the street because for his pals in the street. I only ever had one person girl in the street that lived up. That was Ruby, and Ruby lived opposite us. And Ruby was a real tomboyish sort of a kid. And she used to love, at the side of our house in Watson Street, the side entrance, you'd have to sort of see the shape of the house to appreciate it, but Mum had a bit of a garden, but it was dirt, it wasn't paved. And so for that reason Harry used to play marbles when he was a little kid, and he'd have all his cobbers in, and they'd play marbles, 3 holes. You'd have 3 holes dug there. One was poison. You know how I don't know if you ever played marbles.
No.
No, it would be unknown to you. But it was the things that occupied it, so the little things like that were very, very simple and uncomplicated, and everybody would have their spinning tops, and they'd be spinning them, and because nobody had any money, everything was very simple. And Ruby used to love to come, and it always irritated her. The boys didn't ever want her. She'd try to get in on their game of marbles, and they'd soon kick her out. But and Harry couldn't abide Ruby. He used to give her short shrift, and so it was really funny. So Harry, as I say, he was great. He used to go away down to Jamboree on all sorts of times away, and I used to say to Mum, "Why can't I go?" And she'd say, "Well, you're a little girl, and it's only for the." I couldn't understand why he should have all the fun, because he'd come back and he'd had a whale of a time, and he learned all the arts and crafts of being a Boy Scout and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But he always, even the photographs I have of Harry from being a little kid at school were he always loved a boat. He always loved the water. He was a lifesaver in the Bondi Surf Lifesaving Club. He was also an iceberg. He used to swim every Sunday morning. You know how they throw blocks of ice into the baths, and he would be there. He loved anything to do with water, and on those school photos of the class, he'd be holding up his boat. He had to have a boat. Everybody else would have, goodness knows what, the girls would have dolls and their favourite toy, whatever it was. Harry had to have his boat. And so from the word go, he wanted to go into the Navy. Now, he worked he worked at in the tramways, He was an electrical artificer. He was an electrical, not an electrical mechanic. He was an electrical. Well, he went into the Navy as an electrical art as a tradesman,
Right.
and so he could only go as far as he was a he was an officer, but he was like a non-com, because he was a tradesman. They don't get any higher than that. I've been trying to find that lovely photograph of Harry on one of the ships when the Queen was just the young Queen, and she was sitting on it. She was, and all the whole of the ship's complement were there, and Harry was with all of his non-coms there. They were all in their uniforms, and the Queen was sitting among them. It was just a lovely, lovely photo. Harry did a lot of. He wasn't at home very much. His bedroom was left pretty empty most of the time, because he was in the Korean kerfuffle. Harry, that's right. Harry was a crack marksmanship with a rifle. Mm-hmm. In the war, he had his own. He saved up and got. He belonged to Mick Simmons' Miniature Rifle Club, and for 3 years before the war, they used to have a competition for the greatest marksman, the one that could shoot out the bullseye. And I can remember in Mum's house, on her piano, there was for 3 years Harry won it, and there was Mum kept the targets, and that bullseye was 10 shots, and the whole of the bullseye was shot out, and so the trophy was like a mounted bullet. It looked so good, and so Mum had these mounted bullets. When war broke out, all the rifles had to go in, and Harry had by this time he'd got a microscopic sight put into his rifle. It was a Mauser, and it was a very good rifle, and the government took all the rifles in anyway, so that was that. When he was in the Navy, because he was such a great shot, he was in charge of shelling up the Korean rivers. That they went up those rivers, and that was his job, and in charge of that. And so he loved the life. He saw a lot of the world. He loved Japan. He vowed that was the only country he would like to go back to sometime, when he was in Civvy Street. And so he met up with Dawn somewhere, and this was a mystery. This really was a mystery to me. We knew that Harry was very secretive. He always used to say, if Mum asked him a couple of questions, he'd say, "Why you?" He had an expression. "You're giving me the 3rd degree, Mum." That was really grilling him under oath to. And Mum would only be asking him a simple little question, and you could only ask Harry so much, and then he'd clam up.
Yep.
He'd virtually saying, "Mind your own business," and so when he was going out with Dawn, sometimes he used to get, because I was working in town, he'd get me to pick up theatre tickets. There would be he and Dawn were going to the theatre, and he always would ask me to do it, although Mum was often in town. Mum used to go to town regularly, and so that was my job to sort of see that. And then on occasion, he would he gave me a letter, because nobody had any phones, I don't think. We certainly didn't have a phone. We never had a phone in Watson Street. And on a couple of occasions he would give me a a letter, and it was marked Mrs. Dawn Douglas and an address at Bondi Beach, which I had to post. He never let Mum know anything about that. Anyway, he finished up marrying Dawn, and Dawn never told me anything about why that was her previous name.
Right.
And I never asked her. I thought, well, you don't want me to know, and that's okay by me. And it's no business of mine anyway. But I never knew what all of that was about. But I was trusted to post the letters for him and to do things like that. So there was a secretive side of him. He didn't put his parents in his confidence. He seemed to live a life apart, and being in the Navy sort of suited him. He was away more than he was home, and so on and so forth. So, and then of course they finally went and lived down south somewhere, and then they had one little girl, and that's right. The year of Billy Graham's
Crusade.
Yes, crusade. It was tied up with that somehow. That's right. Dawn was expecting. And just before... Now, what did she do? I can't think what she did, but she did something foolish, and the baby was born. Wait a minute. The baby was premature. That's right. Dawn decided that she would have to be inoculated against malaria or one of the tropical diseases, and instead of smallpox. No, that's right. Instead of smallpox, whatever it was, she decided that she'd have this, and instead of some other thing that she should have had. And the point about that was that it brought on the baby was premature, and on the last day of the Billy Graham crusade, Mum and I, I was hoping that we would be going to that because I'd been so blessed. That's when I made my decision to follow Christ. We finished up in the hospital what hospital wherever she'd been taken, and the little fellow was in a humidity crib, and he was turning and he was moving, and we were delighted to think he was still with us, but he died overnight. And so after that, Dawn said, we'll adopt. And that's when they adopted that little fellow that Paul, I think they called him, that as he got older, he was quite a wild child, and he set fire. He was about 12. I don't know how old he was when he set fire to the school, and he was a real disturbed sort of a child. He was doing all sorts of awful things, and then he got on the drugs. Anyway, he died. And so, look, it's just awful. I'm just trying to think of all the details of that. That's very cloudy at this point in my life, but I know it was awful. But they did have little Janelle. And your mother was able to, and they finally moved up to, when Janelle married, and we went to that wedding, Dad and I, they moved up to, they were somewhere in the Taree area or somewhere up there, to go on an emu farm. Harry got a bug about, going in for, it was, you could buy into these farms, and it's a good proposition to make money. And so they upended, and they went and lived in some remote little place out of Taree, on this farm. They bought this land or whatever. They bought the whole caboodle, and Harry became a sort of on the land now, a real landlubber, and he was felling a tree one day. He was chopping something on the chopping block anyway, some big tree, and he had a heart attack and died. And Dawn rang me with the news. We were absolutely in shock, and at that time we were up at Port Macquarie with the Cheesemans, our friends the Cheesemans, and so Richard came up and picked me up from Sesame and's place at the port and brought me down to Taree where the funeral was taking place. And it was just in the like in the funeral parlour. It wasn't in a church or anything. And because Harry had said in his later years that he and Dawn had been very involved in a church out at eastern suburbs somewhere near Kingsford, and they were right into the church, and Dawn had even made Canterbury caps for the choir and all sorts of things. They were right into the church doing all sorts of things and enjoying the Christian life, a typical Christian, as a Christian family. And then later, Harry took Dawn back to Japan, and they went into, I think it was Japan, somewhere that, I'm sure it was Japan. They went into, I think, a Buddhist temple or something, and Dawn said to me after, she got quite dramatic, and she said, "I've never felt such peace as when I went into that place." And I thought, oh, okay, well, that was nice, and so they were sort of almost toying with perhaps going another way. And so when it came to Harry's death, I'm thinking that they obviously hadn't joined up with the Christian church down there, up there, and so, and it was as I say, it was in the township. It was actually in the town itself, and I'm thinking, I was praying with Seth Cheeseman before I left, and I said, I was asking the Lord that there would be something that would bring a lot of comfort to those that were left, and that would thinking that Harry perhaps was still deep down a Christian, but hoping that something would be said that day. And so we went off. Richard and I went off to the service, and there was the coffin was there, draped with the white ensign, and the man taking the service was the funeral director, and he was a Christian. And we got some beautiful Christian, the Bible was opened, he read from the scriptures, he said some beautiful words, and I was so much at peace, you've got no idea. I thought, well, he, at least for those, they got God's word, that for all those, the mourners as they came in, they got the message that there is everlasting life for those who have repented and know that they're sinners and that Jesus died for them. And so that was a real solace to my heart. You've got no idea. I wouldn't have known how Harry felt about that when he died. I honestly don't know, but I do know that I'm quite sure that Dawn would have taken that on board. Everybody there would have taken that on board. The man spoke so beautifully. I had to thank him after, and we had a lovely bit of fellowship before we left. And we had to go back. Dawn said, "Come back and have some fellowship back home," but it meant going quite a trip. And Richard had other things he had to do. He'd extended himself to go, and so with that we just parted. But your mother and your father had popped in and seen Janelle when they were somewhere travelling around. And that evidently was very, very lovely. They had lovely fellowship with Janelle and her husband and whatever family she's got. I don't know if Chris ever told me about any family, but it was a very worthwhile time. And it was just a shot in the dark to get to a place like that and find out, because Chris wouldn't have known what Janelle's surname was. She wouldn't be a Glover anymore if she was married, and so it was just fantastic, really. Your mother will be able to tell me more about. I must check that one out too, because that's of interest. But since Dawn has died, I think we established that yes, Dawn had died, so that covers that. That's another little facet of my life.
Yeah. Before this conversation, I knew literally nothing about Harry.
You'd have liked Harry. He's a man's man.
Yeah.
He'd have talked the same language.
Yeah.
And he was, in his own way, he was really good. He just wasn't a close brother.
Right.
He just wasn't a close brother to me. And I think it's lovely when families are close. But anyway, that doesn't. I've been more than compensated for that in the family that I've got. You're all so precious to me. Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. Now, Ben, was there anything else on your list?
There is lots, but I'm thinking, what's the time? It's 2:40, so I mean, we can call it a day if you want, and then I can come back next week, or if you're still happy.
Well, I'm still. I don't think I'm closing down. I don't think the grey matter's closing down, but you never know, do you? But give me just another little thing to chew on.
Okay. Okay, so you've talked about living at Bondi with your grandmother.
Yes.
A little bit. So Marcus is interested in knowing about what your grandmother was like.
My grandmother was, how can I describe Granny? She was a very determined, Christian woman, very definite. There was no compromise with Granny, and she let you know it. She'd give you the works if she felt they were warranted. She wouldn't hold back. And so, and her prayer life was incredible. I used to often, when I'd be sneaking into our bedroom, Granny would be on her knees by the bed, praying. And so I'd get what I wanted and go off, and I'd come back a bit later, and Granny would still be on her knees praying. She was a great prayer warrior. On Good Friday, there are some churches, not all churches do it, Christian churches, but they leave the church open, and they have that 3 hours, the 3 hours commemorating Jesus and the agony in the garden or whatever it was. Those 3 hours that Jesus was at prayer, and there wouldn't be a service on, but if you were a praying person and you wanted to just go over in your mind the crucifixion scene and just meditate before the Lord and pray or do whatever you like, just to be quiet and in a quiet place, the church was always open for 3 hours on that Good Friday afternoon. Granny would always be up there, and she would spend those hours at prayer up there, and she never failed. That meant so much to her, and so I could see in my grandmother a person that really loved God. And so because I was taken to Sunday school when I was very, very young, long before I went to day school. I was in the kindergarten class up at St Mary's Waverley, and they were lovely years. All my Sunday school days were so enjoyable. I just loved Sunday school. It was always on a Sunday morning, always, and Harry and I used to trudge up the 2 hills. You had to go up from Watson Street. There was one hill you'd go up, and then you'd have to go up another hill, and St Mary's sat on the top of right up top. There it was, and the Sunday school was chock-a-block full. People did go to church a lot. Most kids did go to Sunday school, and I think it's a great grounding. And while the churches seem to have different things on, I'm not saying the children are ever neglected, they're not, but I know my own childhood was filled with a consciousness of God, and that while in my teenage years I just did my own thing. I would go to communion if I felt like it. It wasn't a be all and end all, and I got a bit casual with the Lord, but it took the Billy Graham Crusades 59 to get me right. To get me back on track, and I realised, and that was interesting too, Ben, because when all of this area was everybody, the war was over, and everybody was back in Civvy Street. Lots of the women in this street, the husbands of the wives of the men, they had taken other jobs. The woman down straight opposite had been a bus conductor, selling tickets to bus passengers, and they were so used to having a job that they wanted to go on working. And I thought, oh gee, that'd be good. Now look, I'm qualified to go into any office. I could cope with any office work at all. Shorthand typing, bookkeeping. I've got all my diplomas to say I'm capable. And so I went for a job, didn't I? And but I think I'd got Richard and Robert children at school, and the man that was interviewing me was a very wise man. I often think about that. And he said to me, he interviewed me and saw my qualifications and told me what was necessary on this job. And he said, now, tell me, Mrs. Jones, supposing one of your children, supposing tomorrow you were working here and one of your children was sick, what would you do? And in a burst of honesty, I said, I'd be staying home and looking after them.
Yeah.
And he smiled and he said, yes, I know you would. He I think he could size up people pretty well. He said, oh yes, he said, well look, and in a very gentle way he said, look, you're not for me.
Right.
And so after that, I gave that a lot of thought and a lot of prayer. And I said, Lord, what can I do? What can I do? And then I realised that there was a real call for scripture teaching in schools, and I thought, oh, I wonder if I could do that. And I saw my minister about it, and he said, do you love the Bible? He sort of quizzed me. He said, and I said, absolutely, it's the Word of God, and I stand on it. And he said, well, do you like children? Oh, yes, I love children. He said, you're right, you're in. And so after that, as I forget what classes I was given, and after that I thought, I need to know more and more and more, and that's when I started my more college studies, and I did quite a lot of those exams through more, and finally, of course, I went into the high schools. I could teach up to year. In those years, there was the leaving certificate. You went up to like 7, 8, 9, and then then the clergy always took the last two, so I was qualified to teach at that level, and my goodness me, I certainly needed all the wisdom that God could give me to go into some of those classes, particularly Beverly Hills Girls High School. There were those very not the brightest. They were what you'd call at the boys' high school. They had classes of children that weren't intellectually up top, but the school concentrated on making them good citizens. On that they were given a teacher, usually an older teacher, that could bring out the best in them, and so up at Beverly Hills in the girls, that's when the two now it was strictly boys. Beverly Hills was strictly girls, and so that's when I got into Holtz with those kids that were dabbling in the occult in the class that I had, and I always remember having my prayer group praying behind me. I had 40 minutes of every week. It was 40 minutes of being tested all the time with this group. They were tough. They were really tough girls, and they were attending seances every Friday night. And I didn't know that until it was revealed to me at the last. After I'd been with them a while, I thought there's something really like you could feel animosity coming out to meet you when you walked into the classroom, and they would do all they could to make that 40 minutes hell. They did everything they could, and I remember beseeching was Thursday. That was the time I used to spend at the high school, and I used to say to my praying friends, please pray for me that I would be very wise when I go into that room, and I'd know how to handle these girls. And that's when I found out that they every Friday night they would attend a séance somewhere, and so I had just found that wonderful passage. I think it's from Deuteronomy. It's years since I've looked it up. That says God is saying through Moses to his people, warning them about going into Israel and saying, when you get there, you're going to meet all the idolatry that's possible. You'll meet up with people that are worshipping idols of wood and stone and precious metals and and you've got to really bring cleansing into them, otherwise they will destroy you. And it deals with Deuteronomy, of course, is the second law. If you read Deuteronomy, it's preparing the Israelites to go into this land. It tells them what they're going to go into, and it says, it's a verse that goes something like this: there shall not be found among you anyone who practices divination or is a fortune teller, a necromancer. It goes through all of those occultish things, all the occult, all those occultish things. And of course seances definitely comes under that, trying to speak to the dead and so on, and contact the dead, stuff like that. And so on this particular day when I found out that they were, one of them told me that they were going into to these sessions of the occult. And so I in some miraculous way that only the Lord, they did have workbooks. It was obligatory that they have a scripture workbook. And so I said, look, get out your workbooks and I want you to write this down. And I went through that. They all wrote it down. They all wrote that verse down. And I said, look, now that is what God is saying. And he's saying it to you right now. You're opening yourselves up to a dark side of spiritual power, and the end is death. Or something like that. Don't ask me now, Ben, but it was something of that nature. I was extremely strong, and after that I didn't have any. They certainly quietened down. I could go into that room and at least they'd give me a hearing. And so God's word has power. It really has power. Mm-hmm. It has power that I haven't got, but it's got the authority of God right behind it, and that was an experience I'll never forget either. Mm. So it's all good. I think God leads us through all sorts of things, and we do become stronger in our faith and more reliant on Him. And we're not called upon to understand anything at all, Ben, but we are called upon as Christians to just trust Him. Trust Him in it. That's all He wants. He wants us to trust Him. Things could look very black. Trust Him at that point. And in Every Day with Jesus that I have with Kim every afternoon, constantly we're doing Jeremiah, and constantly there's that battle between the people going away from God, and he had a hard task reprimanding them, reminding them, and of course they wanted to kill him. They stuck him down the well and did all sorts of things to him. He was called upon, like most of the prophets, to just stand up for what you know is the truth. Mm. And Jesus is truth. He is the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. That was the very inscription that made me go forward at the crusade. That was what was the banner. Mm. That's what it was. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Mm. No one comes to the Father but by me." And so that meant so much to me, and it's so vibrant, it's so alive, and so full of hope and joy. It's just great.
Well, I know there's a few questions about your conversion to Christianity. Well, not really a conversion, I guess, because you have mentioned that you were always...
That's it. That was it.
But we'll come back to that, though, because I do want to spend some time on that, because I know that, Luke was interested in hearing about that, and I'm certainly interested in hearing about it as well. Mm. So maybe we can come back to that and spend a little bit of time on it.
Yes, sure.
So I won't forget that, because I know that's very important to you.
Sure is.
So, okay, so Marcus had some really great questions, actually, some very specific questions. So, you've already spoken a little bit about what life was like in Nawi when you first moved here, and you've described what the land and the farmer with the chicken. Was it a chicken farmer or?
Yes, he was a poultry farmer.
A poultry farm, yep. So, can you tell us a little bit about access to basic services at the time? So things like doctors, chemists, groceries, and deliveries of bread, milk, yes, ice, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about how society functioned in those days with those sorts of
certainly
things?
Yes, well, the bread used to come. First of all, there was the delivery man from the bakery up here near Roselands. There was a big bakehouse there. That's where it was all cooked up there, and it was a horse and cart thing, and he would come round and deliver your bread. We had a little in this wall. There was a little cupboard built into it, a little wooden cupboard sunk into the wall, and I used to leave the money there, and he'd come round the back and take the money and leave it. It was a standard was a standard order every day. It was sort of wholemeal bread or whatever it was that I used to get, and that was that. Very rarely did I see him. The likewise that the milk, the milk was the milkman used to come, and he had a horse and cart too, and you'd have a billy, and he had his tank of milk was in the back of his cart, had its tap, and he'd have a metal container to, which would have a quart, I suppose a quart or a pint in it, and he would know what that was, and he used to come round and put it in the can. He would have to walk right round and put it in there, and that's exactly where it was. That part of the house hasn't been changed, so it was still a walk for him to go into every house, because it wasn't bottled milk as such. We didn't. There wasn't a super. We didn't. There wasn't certainly wasn't a supermarket. Roselands came later. There was a little greengrocer's shop right up at Narwee, and Kit and I used to go up once a week, and we would, with our string bags, and come back loaded with sticks of celery and all the stuff that we wanted. We did have refrigeration, was of course very good, and I've always had a good refrigerator. Didn't have a freezer, and but it kept food pretty good. It was a smallish one, but it was very efficient, and it was much better than a lot of fridges that were on the market at that time. So, and when I wanted to, there was a bus that went up to Punchbowl, and if I wanted a bit of clothing, I'd get on the bus and go up there to pick it up. And so that was about, I think that milk and bread and veggies, meat. There was a little butcher's shop down at the bottom of the bottom of. Oh, there was a chemist on this on this corner up here where the Chinese
the restaurant
eatery is. There's a restaurant there. I think it's still Chinese. It's some Asian food anyway, and there was a chemist shop there after a while. The first chemist shop there was a little group of shops that was soon put up down here in Graham Road. You wouldn't know Graham Road. It's only a hop, step and a jump down here, so just off Carn Street. And there was a first of all there was a chemist, there was a butcher shop, and there was what was the other one? There was meat, and a little fruit shop too. A chemist, a fruit shop, and a butcher. And so at a pinch, you weren't far from. We didn't have to walk miles for it, and that was good because no one had a car first up. When we were first up here, no one had a car, and the first car we had, of course, was we had to go harvest with the Musgraves and buy this old bomb, and that was another story on its own. But like we could survive on that, and the absolute essentials were there. The doctor, eventually, the first doctor, when John Laidlaw was riding on our there was a grocer at up at Narwee Station that used to come around and take an order for groceries, and then he'd bring them back next day, and you'd pay him. He'd dump them all on the kitchen table, and so that was good. And there was also a bank up there at one stage, but there was only I think at Naui Station there was only 3 shops to start off with when we first moved here, and but one of them was the there was also a butcher up there, and so there we in some way until we got a car ourselves, we were catered for pretty well. I would meet Mum in town if there was something that I really wanted to look around the shops. I would. There was eventually there was a bus that used to ply between Hurstville and Punchbowl, and so you could get that either way. And at stopping at Naui Station, so it took you to the station, and so.
That's how you would get to the city. You'd get a bus to the Naui station and then get a train into town.
Absolutely, get a train in town. Usually I used to meet Mum at either museum or at St James stations, and we do do anything that, and I, on occasion even go out to Bondi and have lunch. Sometimes I'd go out to Bondi and have lunch too with Mum, and then I'd do the trip back, and in time for the kids coming out of school. That went on for quite some time. And then, of course, when Dad was working for the big stationer over at St Leonard's, he was given the a truck to come from there every day. He worked over there on the big machine, the big printing presses and stuff like that, the electrical side of that business, and so then I learnt to drive, and so, but early days was you had to find. Oh, that's right. When John Laidlaw fell off the truck, I was going to tell you about that. The nearest doctor was up on King George's Road, and we didn't have any telephones. There were no telephones for ever so long. And somebody, I forget how we got up there, how that doctor was got to know about John, because when he fell off the truck, I think he was knocked out. It happened down Narilla Avenue, and I think they carted him off. And it was quite a, well, he shouldn't have been on the running board. See, the truck had a running board on it, and he was hanging onto the running board and fell off. Right. Shouldn't have been on the running board. If you can imagine a running board on a truck these days, honestly. And so that was the nearest doctor. I can remember going over to Riverwood to a doctor too, before we got Dr. Munro. He's just around here in Shorter Avenue, and he's still there, as a matter of fact, Dr. Munro. It was Dr. Munro that I had when I was having Marcus, but he never made it because Marcus was born in such a hurry. And when it came to the point, he just never made it at all. So, yeah.
Okay, it's super interesting. It's interesting comparing, those basic things that we just take for granted these days. And, like you didn't have the phone, which we'll talk about later. That's another question that I've got coming up. There was you couldn't just call someone, it was, you had to physically get yourself there. And
exactly.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Grandma.
Yes, when you think of instant connection these days in all sorts of ways, because if I had the eyes and the capability, I'd be on the computer too. But it's just as well, because my days seem to be so full now. I wouldn't have time to be looking up my iPads and my SMSs or whatever they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All the things that go and which take up. But then life is totally different these days, isn't it?
It is.
Totally different.
It is.
Communication can be instantaneous, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'll never say anything else but wonderful. While I can't do it and I can't see it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's good to watch these technologies emerge, isn't it?
What, darling?
It's good to see these technologies emerge and grow and
Absolutely,
sort of infiltrate society.
Indeed, it's exciting. It really and truly is exciting. Yeah.
How you going there? Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. My legs are starting to go to sleep. They need to
All right.
be walking around. No, that's just a little bit of a kick around will do, Ben. That's no problem.
No
But
problem.
you must, Ben. What can I get you? Would you like? I'm still hanging on to the thought of that pie.
I'm okay for now, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm just listening intently to these stories. I'm finding them amazing, and
Oh, darling, it must be boring, boring. Oh, darling.
It's anything but boring, and I'm loving it. I'm loving every minute of this. I just want to make sure that if you get tired or something, just let me know. I can come back next week, and we're not going to get through everything today. I can already see that. So,
is that right? Have we chipped away at it though?
We've chipped away a little bit, but there's still so much more to ask, and we definitely won't get through even half of it today. So
we'll make ourselves we'll tackle what we think we can, and then we'll say, well, this is the cut-off point.
Okay. So just having a look at the next couple of questions. I'm thinking we'll see how we go. There's like a couple of more questions just around the day-to-day life and family and stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll see if we can get to the end of these few questions, and then maybe we can wrap it up for today, and I can come back next week or something.
Yeah, good, sure.
Okay, so now this one I'm sure you'll have a lot to talk about here. So, and again, this is from Marcus. He's got some thoughtful questions. So tell us about your kids. So their births, unique traits, and the differences between your children. Were they born in hospitals or at home? Just tell us all about your children.
Yes, well, Richard, of course, being my firstborn, was my doctor that I went back to was the doctor I'd always gone to. He was just a GP. He wasn't he wasn't a specialist, but I went back to him when I was having Richard, and because I knew him, and he knew me, and he was a Roman Catholic, and he had me booked into St Margaret's Roman Catholic maternity hospital at Darlinghurst, and Marcus went. He went over time. I think he was over his time. People were saying, "Oh, you're still here. You're still here," and that must have been. Now wait a minute. That was when we were still at Bondi. Still at Bondi, wasn't it? Because Marcus, these were war years, and we hadn't got this place yet. So when it was time for me to go, my water broke on the Friday morning.
And is this with Marcus or Richard?
This is Richard. This is my firstborn.
Yep.
Firstborn. He was so we got. I don't know how I got to hospital. I think I don't think that an ambulance came. But anyway, I went straight into St Margaret's, and the labour pains I seemed to lose them, and then I went all day Friday, and Saturday the pains were getting worse, but nothing was happening, and the two mothers came in, and my mother and Dick's mother came in, and I can remember Dick's mother saying to my mother, "Why can't they give the girls something?" I was writhing in pain. It was torrid. It really was awful, and and Doctor, oh, what was his name? Anyway, my doctor was, on Saturday night, my doctor was offered some do in the evening, and when he popped in to see me, before he went, he was all dressed in his white tie and tails. He was ready for this do that he was, I don't know if he was a speaker or what, but he was on his way, and the hospital had said, look, she's still in labour and nothing's happening, and so he said, I'll give you something to help you. That was his last words. And so off he went, and as the night drew on, there was an awful sister named Sister Mia, and I said to her, look, doctor said I could have something just to help me with the pain. And she had eyes like a snake. I'll never forget it. And she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, I'm not going to give you anything.
Why?
And she looked so evil. It was just awful. Well, and she didn't give me anything. And anyway, next morning, cut the story down to the bone, Richard was born at 25 to 7 on the Sunday morning. I'd been in like 2 days of labour, and I was very badly torn. They'd had to stitch me, and they said my doctor had attended me. When I came to, I could hear him saying, it wasn't the head that tore her, it was the shoulders. Must have been the way Richard's shoulders came out. I honestly don't know. Anyway, what they had to do was to they tied my knees and my ankles together. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't to move, and I wasn't to use my bowels for a week. Oof. And then they would take the stitches out. Anyway, Dick was told that the family got in touch with Dick, and he was flown up from Melbourne just to see his baby boy, and so on, and went straight back again. It was just compassionate leave because he was in training, and he was goodness knows where he was going to go after that. But anyway, the week went round, and that was terrible. They were giving me all this food to eat, and I didn't. They assured me that I would bust the stitches if I exerted myself at all. So no bowel motions. So anyway, when the week turned round, the sister that had to take that would bring me to the next Sunday, she was off for the day, and nobody else was qualified to take these stitches out. So I had to wait another day. Mm. And when that day came, they gave me a big dose of castor oil. They gave me an oil enema and a water enema, and then they lined up the bed pans, and I could go full pelt then with all this stuff then to get rid of all that stuff. Yeah. And then they took the stitches out after that. They mopped me all up and took the stitches out, and so on. And so it was a very uncomfortable birth. It was extremely uncomfortable. And so Dick had I forget where he'd been carted off somewhere. He came back, I think, on that. He came back anyway to take me home from hospital. I forget. I think I was in hospital about a fortnight, and went home to Narwee, and then of course he was off again. He wasn't staying, and so that winter was pretty cold. See, Richard was born on the 29th of July. It's that's about this time, isn't it? Getting onto this time. But, very, very cold, and of course he would yelp round about 2 o'clock in the morning, yelping. And when you're in somebody else's house, you're very conscious of disturbing them. And yet Sister Anne at St Margaret's had said, don't spoil your baby, let them cry, it won't hurt them. Don't rush to them and don't overfeed them and so on and so forth. So I had to battle with no experience and it really was tough. With hindsight, it was pretty tough. And anyway, but we all survived, don't we? And so that was good. And then, of course, later, Rob was a couple of years later. I think he's 2 years and 5 months or something different. He was born in either October or November, sometime towards the end of the year. And so, and of course, Rob was a different kettle of fish. I had another doctor for him. I didn't have, oh gosh, I think something's bitten me. And so, yeah, that's about all I can tell you about that, Ben. Robert's wasn't so bad, and your mother was certainly not so bad, and Marcus was absolutely a miracle. His was just so, when I think of the first one and the last one, they are so diametrically opposite in every way. It's just incredible, without going into any gory details, but it was lovely. It was lovely, and that's when I recognised how great God was, because with Marcus, his dearest friends were Wendy and Peter Wilkins. They had they were going to be Marcus's godparents. They were Richard's very close pals, or Robert's close pals, one of them anyway, and they were going to be godparents. And what was I going to tell you about that? And anyway, that's right. They popped in here at 8 o'clock. That's it. They popped in here at 8 o'clock, and I said, "Oh look, I'm going to hospital. The time's up. This is the date that I've been given, and I'm off next." So they just sort of wished me all the best, and away they went. And so then this time, we were just going to go up to Canterbury. We weren't going to St Margaret's. And so that's when they popped me in and examined me, and somebody said, "Oh, this baby won't be born till the morning." Now, remember that, oh gosh,
You right?
I'm chewing her hair.
Oh, right.
I'm molting. Then it's gone. Anyway, so that was midnight. This is at midnight, and they all went off duty. They left me in the birthing room, you know. And anyway, I was thinking, now, Lord, you know all about this, Lord. My attitude was completely different. I was very, very relaxed, and I just remember saying, "Lord, just hold my hand." And I remember flinging my arm out like that. "Just hold my hand, Lord Jesus." And as the pain came over me, I relaxed. I didn't tighten up, which people, including myself, would automatically do. And next minute, he was born. And I sat up and I said, I'm sitting up in bed, and I could hear him yelling, and I'm saying, "Yoo-hoo, is anybody there?" And they all came flying, slapped the mask over my face. I'm thinking, you stupid people, he's here. What's that?
Yeah. They missed all the action.
Exactly. I wonder how that was ever written out. I've often wondered about that, you know. Not that they expect, like, hospital staff don't sit by your bedside. I suppose they do in some hospitals, but they certainly didn't. It was rough and ready up there. You know, you you just did what they wanted you to do. But it was, by the same token, they were very good. Yeah, so, and that was good. And Dr. Munro was extremely good. He never made it either. Marcus was born before they could get him to officiate. So that was the three. That was the. Christine was no problem. She was, quite a run-of-the-mill birth, nothing to have a fit about. So that's my four.
Yeah, and as they were growing up, I mean, talked about the different personality traits, the differences between the four children. You know, as very young babes and toddlers, you would have obviously noticed emerging personalities and things. So.
Very much so, very much so. And when you're keeping a log of your baby's progress, it's interesting to see at what stage Richard walked, how old he was, to when Robert walked. And Robert was always a little bit behind Richard. Richard seemed to be more forward in lots of ways. But Robert was the most incredible baby. He never cried. He never. Now people don't believe me, but I can tell you, and my mother can, because we were still with Mum. See, I had Robert out there while I was still. We hadn't come up here then. And even if he was late for his feed, he would lie in his bassinet, and people would talk to him, and he'd be smiling at you. You know, when they get to the stage where they're smiling, just a lovely stage that babies go through. And he never. One night I must have eaten onion or something, and I'd fed him, and he was in the crib next to me. Mum had got. I was in my little single bed, and his crib was right there, and I remember within hours I could hear him vomit. He sort of went, you know that. And I waited for him to yell. You know, babies, at the least the drop of a hat, babies will yell. Not a sound out of Robert. So I just cleaned him up, and he went back to sleep, turned over and went back to sleep. He was just an incredible baby, a non-crying baby. Even the woman next door, I used to put him out in the sun, in the fresh air. I was great on sticking babies out in the fresh air. And she used to remark to Mum, she used to say, I never hear that baby. And Mum would say, no, he just never cries. And she'd had a few children herself. She was an older woman. She was older than my mother, I think. And she couldn't get over it. She was always quite amazed to see this baby and the way he progressed and grew and was no problem. He just was never a problem. Just absolutely amazing. And so Christine was good too. I did get, I usually go down with something after the babies. I got, when you turn yellow, what do you call
Jaundice?
It? Yes. With jaundice, I got jaundice with Christine, I think, and I said to Dr. Munro, what will I do? Will I wean her or what? And he said, no, because remember he's a Seventh-day Addy, he's a man of faith, and he said, no, nature should take care of that. And she came through that, and I came through that, and all was well. But it did leave me with, I used to have, I don't know, it might have been Robert. It might have been Robert when I had something or other that I had to have someone to take the blood every day. Anyway, it showed rheumatic fever. I had rheumatic fever with Rob, and that was awful. And so, but anyway, we all got through it, and of course they're all hale and hearty at the moment. They've had their moments. Richard certainly has had his with his prostate up and so on and so forth. Yeah. End of story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. How you going?
What was that, darling?
How you going?
I'm going quite well, thanks, darling.
Well, we might wrap it up there, I think, for today, Grandma.
Yes. Well, it's been lovely anyway, Ben. Thank you so much for your patience.
Oh, it's
I'm just rambling on.
It's-
I'm just rambling.
yeah, that's beautiful, Grandma. It's I could listen for another 3 hours, but I don't want to wear you out.
You must be bored. Oh, golly.
I'm anything but
history.
bored.
Oh. Was history ever your subject?
No.
There you go. That's what I mean. I make my point.
All right, Grammy.
Okay, darling. Well, let's